Good evening and welcome to the Underground Subway. This will be a podcast that airs weekly in which we discuss, we're going to talk about ways to help us to become free. There are many aspects to freedom. There are many aspects to liberty. And so we're going to talk about various ways of freedom, being liberated, being free. I will continue to preference these talks by letting you know that years ago, my grandmother's first cousin was Harriet Tubman. And Harriet, she led many slaves to freedom by using what is known as the Underground Railroad. We are not going to use the Underground Railroad because we're in 2022, and now that we have gotten past the railroad, we use something called the subway system. The unique thing about the subway system, and I very frequently rode the sub, what we call it for short, the sub in Philadelphia, is that we have a sub in Philadelphia called the L, and the L stands for the elevated train that comes out of the ground, and it actually travels on a track above the ground, and then it will go back under the ground. And so we're talking about the underground part of the subway system, which means that you can't see it from above ground. It's a secret passageway, and we want to talk about what we need to do to become free, to become liberated. I said in earlier podcast that Harriet said that she could have freed a lot more slaves if they just knew that they were free. And so we're going to expose some areas of our lives that we need freedom in, and we're going to see what we need to do. We're going to discuss what we need to do to become free. When we talk about freedom, well, the definition of freedom is the power, the right to act, to speak, or to think as one wants to without hindrance or restraint. And I think that is very important. Let me repeat that. It's the power or the right. And I want to talk about that during this podcast, the right that we have to freedom. You have a right to freedom to act, to speak, or to think as you want without hindrance or restraint. In this podcast, I want to discuss the freedom that we need to have. There are different types of freedom: freedom physically, freedom financially, freedom in our health, in our bodies. But in this podcast, I want to talk about the freedom of thought, the freedom of thought, the ability to have your thoughts not being restrained. And when your thoughts are not restrained, then it will open up many doors and many opportunities for the rest of your life to flow. Let me say it like this, that if you ever hopped in a car to take a trip, you hopped in the car and you're going out of town on vacation or going to visit loved ones or going to handle business out of town, before your body actually gets in the other city, your mind has already gotten there. You've already thought about what you're going to do when you get to New York City or when you get to Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles, wherever you're going, Houston, Texas, Philadelphia, Tampa, wherever you're going, your mind gets there ahead of you. You already pictured the road that you're going to take. And so what that teaches us is that before you can achieve something, there has to be a freedom of thought, a freedom in your mind. Now, according to the Human Rights Act, Article 9, which is entitled The Freedom of Thought, Conscience, and Religion, it says this, that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his or her religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Article 9, Section 2 says the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs shall be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of public safety, for the protection of public order, health, or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. In other words, you can have your liberty, but you can't have a freedom of thought to where you cross that line, that imaginary line, to where you endanger someone else. And so when we talk about the freedom of thought, and we talk about that, one of the things that Article 9 says is that you as an individual have a right as an individual to change your mind, based on what you want to do, based on how what you feel as though is correct for you, not necessarily being coerced and a lot of times we are influenced by other people. We're influenced by others. We make decisions based on what other people say or other people suggest. And the question is if we are making decisions, if we're making choices based on what someone else says, is that truly a liberty? Am I really experiencing a liberty? Am I really experiencing a liberty or freedom in my mind if everything that I do, every decision that I make, I'm only making it to satisfy someone else? I'm only making this decision to make someone else happy. If we look at this a little deeper, remember we said that the subject or the title of this podcast being the Underground Subway gets its roots from the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman was setting free slaves. Well, it's the same thing. A slave had to do whatever the master told him or her to do. That slave had very little ability to act or think on his own. He could think on his own. She could think on her own, but she could not act, or she could not move, or he could not move based upon what his imagination was saying. In other words, in my thought process, I can imagine being free, but yet and still I couldn't act on it and be free. The reason why I couldn't do that is because I had to make a decision. I had to act in a manner that satisfied someone else who happened to be my master. And so now, if my body was enslaved, then what happened more often than not was because my body was enslaved, there were some people whose mind was never enslaved. What I mean by that is, although their body was enslaved, they constantly thought about, they constantly dreamed about being free. Although my body is in bondage, I can picture myself being free. I can imagine myself being free. I can see myself being free. And like I said in another podcast, not only do I see myself being free, not only do I see myself being out of this situation, but I see my seed, my children being free. Because I don't want to be free and liberated and have children who are still enslaved. So let's move from then, let's move to today, to the year 2020. Do I want to have a liberated mind, the ability to think, the ability to make decisions, to change my mind? That Article 9 talks about that everyone has a right, a human right, to change your religious views if that's what you want to do as an individual or as a community. It says you can change your mind in private or in public. But I don't want to change my mind and release my thought pattern, release my mental being, and still have my children still be in bondage. I want them to be free as well. So we have to release our mind. How do we release our mind? How do we free up our thoughts? We have to think outside of the box. We have to, and here's a word. I'm going to say a word that most people don't like to hear, and it could be considered what many used to call a dirty word. It's called reading. The more you read, the more you gain information, and not move strictly on emotions, because your thoughts being free is not based on emotions. Emotions will say that I'm in bondage and I need to be set free, and I'm going to get angry and I'm going to fight someone to get free. But the real person, the person that is real, that really determined person that's determined to be free, will say, I can't become liberated or free in my mind until I develop a strategy. And in order to develop a strategy, I have to gain information. So that's where reading comes in. That's when you have to invest in yourself. You have to understand that you have to invest in yourself as far as information, obtaining books, asking questions, attending seminars, listening to podcasts, doing more than just surfing social media to find the latest gossip. Anyone can do that, to find the hottest story. But no, if I'm searching social media, I'm searching for something that I could utilize to set my mind free. Because before anything else, before my financial situation is free, before my physical body is set free, I have to free my mind. There's an old song that says, "Free your mind, your body you will follow." So you got to free your mind. You have to release all of the old garbage that came into your mind. You're going to have to take self-inventory and say, okay, what are my beliefs? The ninth article of the Human Rights Act talks about the freedom of religion, but what we're talking about is not necessarily religion, but it's your core beliefs. What do you believe? And sometimes we need to sit back and say, what do I believe? What was I trained? I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about life. What was I taught that may be incorrect? What was instilled in me that may be incorrect? And when I'm not talking religion, it could be politics. Your political views may be wrong. I'm going to bring this subject up. Your views toward other human beings may be wrong. We know that we live in a time when there's more hatred now in the world than there's ever been. There's more than there's ever been. More racism, more bitterness, just because of a person doesn't look like I look or didn't come from where I came from. And we end up hating one another. That belief is something that we need to sit down and do a self-evaluation. And when we do a self-evaluation, that's when we can say, you know what? Remember, I said this, that Harriet said, I had the ability to free a lot more slaves if only they knew that they were slaves. How many of us could be free in our minds, could be free in our lives? But the problem is we don't know that we are in bondage. We don't know that we're captive. We don't know that we've been trained and instilled something that is detrimental to us. Years ago, I was on a playground at a school and I saw a little white girl and a little black girl on the swings together, and their faces were about 3-4 inches apart. They were just laughing, and they stopped and they just got in each other's face and smiled. And it dawned on me then that hatred, bitterness, and racism is something that is taught. So if that's the case, if it's taught, then maybe I need to sit back and say there's some things in my life that I need to be untaught. There's some things in my life that I need to discard. And once I discard that, what is happening is in my mind, I'm realizing I wasn't free after all. Listen, my friends, we're going to be free. We're going to be liberated. Just hang with us on the underground subway. I'm David Austin. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And we'll keep going. We'll get it together, and we'll grow together, and we'll grow to freedom in the days and weeks to come. Peace. Love you. And there's nothing you can do about it. Look in the mirror tonight and ask yourself, did I do something to work toward my purpose, or did I waste another day?